Okay. Thank you for joining. It's an hour out of your day, but I'm sure it's not going to be a waste of time. I know a few of you have been on the webinar before with me. Standard preamble at the start to pretty much, you're going to sit on your computer if you can, minimize your screens, flip your phone, all that sort of stuff, because I'm going to go through the content pretty quick. There's a fair bit to get through, and we want to give ourselves the best chance to soak it up. So here's a first level of interaction. And because there's only a few of us in line, you can either verbalize it or throw it in the chat. But if you could somehow give a one-sentence description to be able to define what a critical risk is, what would you say or share? So you can either type it or have a crack on the microphone. Interested in what people have to say, because I see there's sometimes some variance when we're talking about these things, and it's important for us to get on the same page. So what's your definition, or how would you describe what a critical risk is if you're trying to tell someone else? So throw it in the chat or speak it. It's no right or wrong. It's not a trick question. I'm just having a look at keeping an eye on the chat function here to see who's going to share something. Someone can go first, I'm sure. So, well, how would you define a critical risk? Thanks, Shane. A risk that has a high likelihood of permanent injury or multiple deaths. Okay, so you've got the a strong S safety slant in that. Yep, so high likelihood of permanent injury. So you've got likelihood. Yep. Anyone else have a variance on that? An unwanted event with high severity. Yep. Thanks, Rod. So unwanted event could be. Yeah, go for it.
I'd go down the line of I guess critical risk is something if it's not controlled, will have a unwelcome outcome.
Unwelcome outcome. Depending what unwelcome means to the business. Yeah. Yeah, I think we're all on the same page here. So there's a term that I bandy around a lot, and I think we're all aligned there, is material or materiality. Each business has its own interpretation of what's material in terms of consequence types and consequence levels. So what does unwelcome mean to PIMS might be different to what unwelcome means to a little workshop in Paget, or Paget, as someone said the other day. Cool. I'm not going to ask for an example. So if we think about what's the problem? So critical risk management, what's the problem? How do we know this to be true? And what am I going to talk about today? So, well, I know at least 4 of you on the line. We're still not getting it right, are we? The significant incidents, high potential incidents tell us that high potential hazards, unfortunately, the fatal outcomes as well. We're still not in control of the critical risk management process. Everyone's doing lots of stuff. And there's still certainly more can be done. And when I go through this, I'll maybe give some examples of that. And so what I'm going to share shortly is the framework with a bit of the how-to, what that could look like, to then allow you to do a bit of a cross-reference to how your business is going in that particular space. So most of you know me, except for Miko, pretty much been able to do this for the last 5 years, and doing some stuff with the regulator shortly as well, which is pretty exciting. So you've heard this before. Unfortunately, I'm working on that. My daughter does watch the recordings back, and I have to do 5 push-ups every time it slips out. So I'm getting there. Critical risk management's a mouthful, so I'll shorten it CRM. Got a lot to get through, and it is interactive as well. I've been where you are, and just doesn't feel great to it to be a one-way dialogue. So I'm really interested in some of the responses you might have in and around this. So what I'm going to cover is the fundamentals, a bit different from my previous style where we talk on 3 things. I'm going to do my best to get through the framework as quickly as possible. Got time for Q&A at the end. And you're familiar a bit with the framework, I'm going to guess. I'm going to validate that shortly. A 45-minute slot doesn't even touch the sides on the level of depth we need to go to. Even though our 2-day doesn't really unpack it as much as I would like to. But we'll do the best we can. And at the end, I'll talk about what you can do to get more info. And I'll talk about some of the little freebies we offer. Okay, so first question to yourself, Jug, Miko, Rod, Shane. In your experience with critical risk management, now we kind of understand what we're talking about. What's the bottlenecks? What's the barriers? What's the pain point? Why aren't we getting it right in your experience? So you can answer this either through the lens of your current business or through the lens of industry. So you can either throw it in the chat or you can share it over the microphone. So what's stopping us from getting it right? What do you think is the biggest issue in your experience? Miko, different perceptions of risk. That's a good one. Absolutely. And if I think about the different levels, if I think about workforce level versus supervisor versus superintendent versus manager versus board, everyone can have different perceptions of the same risk and how it's realized. Yeah, that's a good one. So how do we get everyone on the same page? And there is a mechanism we can do that actually. All right, Miko shared. What about yourself, Jug, Rod, Shane? Shane, basic understanding of risk management, those risks which although occur less frequently could cause the greatest harm. Basic understanding of risk management. Yep. So those critical few. One, getting on the same page, maybe similar to what Miko's mentioned there, but two, saying, well, hang on, this is pretty important that we still need to manage this thing just as well, probably with more rigor than we do with hands and figures and strains and all that.
Even after when we did the broad brush, Christian, that still was one of the fallouts I found out from our broad brush. People, even though from the part of the SLT or head of departments, still struggling with the basics and then that next step.
Yeah, gotcha. That is interesting. That's a nice share. Thanks, mate. Anyone else? Rod, Jug, pain points, issues? Why don't we? Oh, there you go. Thanks, Rod. Minimal sharing of information management techniques within and across industry for improvement of all. I'm not going to get on my soapbox around that one. I shared something recently on LinkedIn on that, Rod. 100% agree. We don't share well at all, which is really unfortunate. You guys probably have some examples too. All right, let's keep rolling. Okay, so the framework. So I'm going to assume, Miko, have you seen this framework before? I'm going to assume Jug, Rod, and Shane have. Just a little yes, no, mate. Have you come across this one before? So the ICMM, International Council of Mine Minerals, Rod, Oil and Gas Industry, mile in front of us, they share information. Yeah, I've seen some of the stuff they do, that Safer Together campaign. Miko, you're familiar with this. Awesome. All right. We're on the same page. Okay, so we're going to put our scenario hat on. So you are the safety manager of a new surface coal mine in Queensland. You've been tasked with implementing a CRM process with making sure that it picks up and there's attention to the risk of surface fire. So if we now go to our our framework, starting in our plan, so nothing's yet in place, we've got to do everything end to end. So if we think about the planning process underneath CRM, it's all about developing a plan for implementation, but then also being able to set up that when we're in business as usual, that the CRM process continues, doesn't it? Implement, but then stabilize, monitor, improve, etc. So what we'd expect to see then with organizations either setting up for this or have implemented is we can go and find in the safety and health management system, there's either a dedicated document to critical risk management. This is how we do critical risk management, or it might be a section within the risk management procedure or something like that. There's no right or wrong, but we can go and find what that looks like, and it's described. We can see that the key roles, risk owners, control owners, verifiers, understand what the process is. we can see that there's defined materiality criteria. Remember, we talked about that, about you know, being able to determine what is an unwelcome event, what's the threshold of consequence versus not. So with that in mind, when we go through to these stages, down the bottom, a quick feedback reflection from yourself within your current business or industry. How does your business perform? If you give your business a scale of 1 to 10, 1, you know, nothing in place, way far away. 10, look, we've got all that nailed. And obviously, anywhere in between, there's a bit of a subjective thing. So Shane, you've already done that. You guys have got a 5. What else? If you could self-reflect against your business, how would you rate where it is with respect to this implementation and planning aspect? You just put a number into the chat. Rod's got a 6. Thanks, mate. Jug, Miko. Oh, Miko, you got a 6. Thank you as well. Jug, I could probably guess, but I won't. What would you guys have, Jug, if you're still there? I'll keep an eye on the chat. 4. Yeah, cool. All right. So you got a little bits. Okay. So we can see now where we are versus where potentially the opportunity is. So let's say we've got our plan, set up the architecture. The step here, which I think most businesses now are doing not too bad, is around identifying our list of critical risks or material risks or catastrophic risks, whatever the terminology is within the particular business that they use. And so what does good look like? We would expect to see a broad brush risk assessment or baseline risk assessment or whatever the term might be, but it is a RAC style risk assessment done, which looks across the business, casts the net far and wide, all activities, all processes, all operational areas to return what are our critical risks, who owns them, what's the ownership or the risk owners or which department, and at a high level, we're thinking about what systems have we got in place in terms of controls. So normally we would see in the safety and health management system, we would see a 1-for-1 relationship, let's say surface fire. Then in the safety and health management system, there would be a fire management plan as an example, which describes how we manage the risk of surface fire and potentially underground fire at the same. And it's in date and documented. So how would your business, I think, yep, that's it. How would you rate your business in this space about being able to identify them, consolidate them into a list? We've got ownership, got high-level controls. We've got some stuff in the SHMS. What's the rating out of 10 there? Shane, you've got a 6. Okay, and you shared some of the potentials. Miko, 6, 7. Doug, you guys are 4, and Rod, we got a 6 there. Okay, so middle of the pack. Some opportunities for improvement. I'm pretty sure most of you would have something in the broad brush risk assessment space. So let's keep going through our pathway. So now we've got our list of critical risks. The next step, which I've summarized it here, I deviate away from how they've described it in the ICMM framework. To me, we go risk identification, then risk analysis. And within risk analysis, we identify controls and critical controls. So we'd expect to see, let's say, surface fire, we're continuing on as the idea that there would be a surface fire specific risk assessment within which we could glean out causes, consequences, very specific, measurable and auditable preventative and mitigating controls. Each of those controls has a control effectiveness assessment done. You know, how good is it? In here is where we'd identify critical controls. And we'd also, for these critical controls, identify failure mechanisms and what do we do to stop them from failing. So we'd be looking for a type of risk assessment. And most people probably know the answer to this. What is the most popular tool that appears to be used to analyze a critical risk? You know, want to hazard a guess in the chat? What's the tool that everyone's using at the moment?
Christian, I know with the bow tie,
Yep.
And even with the mine inspectorate has spoken about the bow ties with critical risk.
Yep.
One of the things that I've found is probably being, and I'm wondering if the other attendees have had the same challenges, has been then, especially being a new site, the time and the commitment to make all that happen.
100%. 100%.
And the industry went away from bow ties, and now it's like, okay, with the critical risk management, let's go with the bow ties. And I can sit here now and say, look, it's not my strength.
Yep.
Out of all risk management tools, bow ties is definitely, like, I would view it as a weakness.
Yep. Gotcha. Yeah, so bow tie, you hit the nail on the head. Jug, you said bow tie XP. I'm sure bow tie XP would love for you to be saying that to the rest of the industry, to use their tool, but bow tie, absolutely. Shane, yes, bow ties take a lot of time. In my mind, they are the right level of investment into analysing the risks. Certainly, bow tie is coming in, well, not coming in, but let's say coming back into the framework now that I've seen the revised recognised standard 2, and then there's also the Commissioner's risk assessment publication that came out, so Kate Dupree's, where they specifically called out broad brush and bow tie. And yes, the skill set on bow tie analysis, it's not a common thing. That is, come and join one of our training courses that we run, because we're looking to fill that gap. We've got safety professionals running around. Hey, go and do a bow tie. They'll have a crack, but they've never been through the process of, how do you build a bow tie end to end? They probably can have a good go at it, but there's some minutiae inside that process that if you're not careful, it can go off the rails.
And that's where I found the pushback, where people have been in the industry for a period of time and gone, no, you don't need bow tie. The industry's getting away from it, and they're not reading the communique that's coming out from the inspectorate.
Yeah. Well, and regardless of the inspectorate, in my mind, a pure critical risk management process needs this level of analysis for each critical risk anyway.
With taking the bow tie program and bow tie process just in its vanilla form, it doesn't give you, the likelihood and consequence. It doesn't give you a ranking, so you need to use it in conjunction with another risk management process to be able to give you that. So bow tie is more around looking at where your criticality of controls is, either in preventative or mitigating factor. But it needs to be used in conjunction with another risk management process, not just on its own.
Yeah, you're spot on there, Jug. So this is where I've seen bow ties being bastardized sometimes. So bow tie, well, let's go into it. Wasn't intending to. So bow tie is designed for one risk and for a loss of control of the energy sources of that risk. So you can see here on this slide, loss of control of vehicle. Yep. Now we can have many different causes of leading to a loss of control of vehicle. We can have many different consequences, but it's still only the same risk. And this gives us the ability to granulate and go deep on controls and causes and pathways and work out what do we need to put in place. Those controls, some may exist, some may need to be created. That'll all flow into your safety and health management system, or your what other different systems are. So it's a good critical risk-based view on it. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that a loss of control of vehicle is the risk assessment that sits behind using mobile plant, because the legislation calls out, have something for using mobile plant. So we'd have a rack style view. So racks are designed for multiple steps, multiple hazards, and being able to do likelihood and consequence, where a bow tie is not going to give us that outcome. So generally, what good looks like scenario is we have a whole bunch of bow ties. Then we also have a whole bunch of operational racks. The bow ties are still flowing into the different areas, but the racks are seen as the one-to-one relationship sitting behind in there. I'll keep moving. Happy to talk more about that at the end. Probably everyone's aligned to that anyway. So we talked about bow ties. I'm going to assume we're understanding. What good looks like is we have an objective, or more objective process in terms of determining what a critical control is. So we just don't do the risk assessment, say, point to on the page, well, that's our critical control. We'd expect to see some type of selection process. And here's an example of one that we use. One thing to keep in mind that we don't see a lot of, that I believe is pretty important, is considering the effectiveness of the control as part of the critical control selection process. So to me, if we come up with a control, say, hey, that thing's critical, But if we do an effectiveness assessment on it and it comes out as low effectiveness, then it doesn't make sense for us to consider that as a critical control. Unless it's the last one standing. So summarizing this risk analysis component, we'd expect to see bow ties or a similar type of analysis type risk assessment for each critical risk, smart controls, control effectiveness. We've used a flow chart or a selection process to identify critical controls. We've identified failure modes and prevention strategies, and we have identified critical control owners. And now you recognize STEM 22, that they have some type of familiarization within that critical control or competence in that critical control. So self-assessment, how does your business go, scale of 1 to 10, in relation to analysis? Analysing the critical risk. So who wants to go first? Rod's a 5, Jug's still developing 3, Miko 6, and Shane 4. Okay, so we're still tuning the trend. Jug, you've given yourself a pass mark because you're on the journey. Understand? Okay, so we've done analysis here. So now we're down to around defining performance requirements, which is essentially for these things that we said are critical controls. We are going to specify the desired performance of these critical controls, which could consider things such as, well, what are the standard BAU, business as usual activities we have in place to make sure the critical control is just still there and doing what it needs to do, plus other things, ownership, training, how can it fail, what do we stop to do it from failing, what's a TARP-based strategy. So if it starts to deviate away from norm, do we have some proactive triggers in place to pick that up and do something about it, and our trusty old verification process. So popular tool, well, I'll say popular, but I don't see a lot of them. Does anyone know of a tool that we use to achieve this outcome of defining these requirements? Anyone has a guess? Generally, it's a document. And most organizations, most mature organizations have them if they have a critical control. Anyone? No? No? Okay. Critical control performance standard. I'm going to assume, can't see your faces, but you've heard of that term before. So what you see here on the right-hand side is an example of the template that we use to support businesses. On the left-hand side is example of the parameters that are considered as part of the performance standard design. Caveat, now what we do is we give as much as we can, the full gamut, and generally what happens is most businesses try and find, well, where can they practically land on that continuum. So I'll give you that caveat disclaimer. So we'd expect to see some type of document. So it might be a document or a structured set of data which defines a lot of these requirements. So we're saying this is how we expect it to behave and achieve, and this is what we're going to do to make sure it delivers that. And once we've defined all of that, then that releases or informs our verification strategy. So the verification is who's going out to check what and when, and what do they need to check. All of those things come from this overarching critical control performance standard. So for example, for surface fire, one of the critical controls was the fire sprinkler system as an example. Then we'd have a critical control performance standards for the fire sprinkler system where we documented all of that. And then we may have controls where someone has to go out and check the objects themselves, go out and check, how they're going out in the field, the fire sprinklers. Someone else might have to go and look at the maintenance records sitting in behind it. Someone else might have to go out and look at competencies for the people involved in the fire management process, or management of that control process. So what good looks like is we'd see a performance standard for each critical control. The performance standards are more than just a 1 or 2 liner, so it considers multiple elements, and that combined, so all of those elements combined, are what sets the scope for the verification program of what's going out and being checked and who's doing it. So another cross-reference. How does your business look like in this phase, in this sphere, around the defined performance requirements? Out of 1 to 10. See what people have to share. Jug as above, I think was 3 and improving. Shane is 4. Yes. Miko 6. Okay, that's good. Over halfway. So I'll assume there is some types of performance standards. Yep. And Rod, can't see if you already put one in. No, not yet. I'll keep an eye on that, Rod. See if you've got something happening there. Okay. But keep going around the chart. So we've analysed the risks, come up with the performance requirements. Now we're about assigning accountability. So what's that all about? We've identified owners for the critical risk management system in and of itself. I was having an interesting conversation with someone this morning around that. So where we're heading, and in my mind, it makes sense, similar to what's happening with contractor management, certainly in Queensland Coal, that we'd have an owner for the management of the critical risk management system. So named person, making sure it's in place, because we know that these things can erode over time. Also risk owners, control owners, even people that form verification strategies. So we'd look to see what good looks like. We see these formal appointments. So it's, sometimes we've seen just spreadsheets, but more than that, people have accepted the appointment, they understand the responsibilities of performing the role of a risk owner, a critical control owner, potentially even a verifier. And those people have some type of familiarization or training in what are they required to do in the critical risk management process as the role of a risk owner, control owner, verifier. What does good look like? What are the expectations? So how does your business go in this space? Accountability, making it pretty clear, defining what those responsibilities are, and documenting that and giving some people some upskilling. How do you go out of 1 to 10 here? I've got to look at the numbers and make sure it's timestamped so I know what the latest thing is. So how do you guys look out of 10? Shane, training for key roles, 10-8, yeah, absolutely. Mika 5, Jug 3 have aligned SLT to some. Yeah, absolutely, Shane. So the example I give is if you lost your maintenance manager tomorrow and a new maintenance manager comes in, how do they know what they're responsible for? Right or for, it could be implied, well, hang on, you own all of these risks, you own all of these critical controls, and you're responsible for doing all of this stuff to help manage both of those things. What's the onboarding process for someone who holds those important obligations? There's generally a bit of a gap, and tying it into TNA is a pretty strategic tool to make sure it at least gets picked up. All right, let's keep moving on. So implementation, you'd be familiar with this. This is fairly more straightforward, isn't it? It's not that complex. So what we do find is certainly with organizations that go really hard on broad brush and bow ties is there's a lot of trailing work, actions falling out of bow ties. And sometimes there could be, if you've done 10 bow ties in the last 6 weeks, then there could be a whole mountain of work for one role or more than one role. And so we wanted to make sure, and some of that's pretty critical work. That's one of my observations I shared just recently. We want to get that in the system and execute it. So that's part of the implementation process, in addition to scheduling out the verifications of who's going to do what by when, making sure it's a structured process. We haven't overwhelmed people, making sure we're not calling them all at the end of the month. All of the things in the SHMS have been updated. We know touch points in the risk management procedure, potentially maintenance management, defect management, a whole host of things. And we've actually done the training to the frontline supervisors if there's a difference in what they need to do. Like we talked about, risk owners, control owners, potentially SLT. So how does your organization go in this space? When you just think about some of these aspects, in terms of what implementation could look like. And if you gave yourself a 1 out of 10, sorry, 1 to 10, not 1 out of 10, where would you sit on that continuum? Frontline workers is obviously sometimes it's a bit of an oversight. Doug, 3 still. What do we want our frontline workers to know about from a critical risk management perspective? Rod, 6. Shane, 4 to be very generous. Okay, generous 4. And Miko, how do you guys go? 5. Lack on providing training to owners and knowledge to frontline. Yeah, sometimes I'm a little bit incredulous, but I can kind of understand it. We might have the best system in the world, but if you went out and asked your frontline worker, well, tell me what your top 10 critical risks are, or tell me what the key critical controls are related to this task you're about to undertake, sometimes it's just a blank space. So we know there's a gap there in our system if we get to that point.
I get that when I just asked when pre-starts and toolbox what our 3 principal hazards are.
Yeah.
And just get crickets.
Yep. That's it. So something's still not clicking, is it? Something's still not right in our process.
Yeah, Christian, I think sometimes it's in the vocabulary that we use as well. We as safety for people, professionals, and work with this stuff all the time. We can get caught up with the wording. If I go to our blokes and I have a chat to them, I say, do you understand what I mean if I say critical risks? And they look at me, and then I say, well, what about principal hazards? And I get some more nodding of heads, and then I go, right, fellas, what can kill you when you're undertaking this task? Okay. Then I align that and say, well, what I'm talking about here is our critical risks. And you can see the lights come on. So we've got to be a little bit we've got to be careful that we don't become wrapped up with our own little world.
Yep. That's an excellent point, Rod, isn't it? So what language do we use? So I guess when we are doing that frontline training in this space, are we using the vanilla training pack, or has there been a language conversion process?
Yeah. So we've got a dozen people sitting at the RSOE at the moment, new to industry people, and every one of those will be able to tell you the critical risks involved with underground coal mining from a broad perspective. By the time they walk out I checked with them yesterday. They were able to identify those yesterday after a couple of weeks. They're not experts in it, but they know the critical risks, and they know the generic controls.
Yeah, nice. It's a good start. Thanks, Rod. So post-implementation, now about the verification and reporting side of things. So reporting on the health of said process and said system. I've called it considerations because to be fair, everyone still is finding their feet in this space. Certainly some of these programs and strategies are new. So are there some existing reports that can be piggybacked off that can help add some extra elements related to critical risk management? So is there some stuff around risk profile? The bottom left here is around potentially a dashboard type view for the actual critical controls themselves. So if we have, let's say, 100 critical controls, we know we're doing verification, they may be going on a bit of a effectiveness journey, depending on what's happening at the particular time, and it may be in the green, might be in the red, might be in the yellow, shuffling through that. So how do we capture that? What does it mean if a verification shows there's a deficiency in a critical control? Does it mean the whole critical control is red, or is it just a little aspect there? So some considerations, and then they're potentially still lagging aspects. We can also then look at some process metrics. So people are doing stuff to manage the critical risk management process, putting in place measures on that. So for example, if we created a rod for our own back where we said, well, every year we're going to look at a bow tie, how are we going with that process, as an example? So what good looks like, again, it's a journey at the moment, but there are measures or metrics and KPIs implemented around this process, some related to controls, and risks, and some also consider the process itself and measuring the process. We'd expect to see, we are monitoring the execution works, including verification, and we're capturing evidence and things like that. Where we identified deficiencies in a critical control, that's one, obviously fixed, but two, we get that reported, and critical control deficiencies are seen as a good free lesson, if you like, as opposed to a bad thing, and everyone's in trouble because we're proactively finding an issue with a control before it leads to an incident. So what does it look like for your business in terms of the reporting and verification process? If you gave yourself a 1 out of 10, 1 to 10, sorry, on this scale. Bit of self-reflection here. Shane 4, Rod 6. Okay, Rod, I think you guys been a consistent 6 throughout. Jug, Miko. 0, just kicking off the program. Yep, okay, Miko 6. Yeah, okay. Cool, that's good. And then the final step, well, if we get some intelligence back about things aren't going according to plan, what are the processes we've got in place and how are we going with actually executing those processes? So, risk owners are aware of how the risk is going, and if there's issues with critical controls, critical control owners are aware of issues with critical controls, and there's an investigation process which may be tiered related to the nature of the deficiency or failure, and we're doing something about it to fix it up. And also organizations have got their head around is, do we treat a critical control failure that led to a significant incident and a critical control issue we identified as part of the verification, do we treat them one and the same? Or if we don't, or if we do, what's our mechanism to be able to evaluate these both ends of the scale to work out what do we need to do? And this is part of the things we go through with our training course is one idea or one suggestion that some businesses could do is treat it like we would with an incident, hazard report. Okay, what was the actual or potential consequence of this? And if it would potentially was a level 4 or 5, so let's say single fatality or multiple fatality, using some generic speak, then we'd go off and do a equivalent level of investigation, notification, reporting that we would for a potential actual level 5 incident. Versus, okay, we set a target that 100% of our people need to be trained in, I don't know, let's say fire sprinklers, and we only had 98% done. So there was 2% missing. So if we applied that same model, we might go, well, hang on, that 2% and the nature of the deficiency, we don't think there's a level 4 or 5 risk here. We'll just follow our standard protocols of, okay, what's our strategy now to plug that gap? So wrapping out this aspect, it's around what good looks like is there is some type of process to analyze or assess critical control failures. And what do we do about them? Our investigation process always prompts us for, was there a critical control or a critical risk related to this incident? And if there was, then there's some extra stuff we need to go and follow up and check. And if we find, if there was an incident or an incident investigation, and we had some learnings post an event related to a critical risk, that part of the actions go back upstream, back up in our pathway here to look at, well, do we need to update the bow tie? If we did, was it something that was about a cause that we missed or a failure mode that we missed or a consequence type that we missed? Did we say that it was a control that was more effective than what we thought? Is there a new control? All of this sort of upstream work to improve the system. So then downstream, we've cut off that particular chain of events, if you like. So final assessment. How's your business sit on the continuum here to give yourself or your business a rating in terms of being able to respond? Jug as above, being able to respond to issues or deficiencies in the CRM process. Miko got a 5, which I think is pretty consistent there. Shane got a 4. And Rod, I'm going to guess a 6. No, 5. Okay. So your probably average is 5.98. Nice. Okay, so I mean, clearly moving to the wrap-up phase now. We know there's some issues. We know we're all on a journey. By everyone attending, clearly know there's some improvements can be done, and looking for, once they help, but any other ideas on how things could be improved. So what we know is that the process builds upon the step before, and if we get the step before wrong, then everything downstream may go skew. So, for example, I've come in and seen broad brush risk assessments which have completely missed the mark, but this same organisation has critical controls and is doing critical control effectiveness assessments, and it's pretty much a waste of time because they got it wrong all the way upstream. So we know there's lots of steps, all built upon each other. We need to get them right. There's many activities and deliverables. It needs to be integrated to put in place. And so similarly, same thing again. How do you do it? Do it the way I've been doing it for the last 5 years. You keep growing and evolving, which is the trial and error thing. Or, as I said right at the start, what can you do to get some more information? And we have been doing this for a few people across the industry at the moment. Is essentially, we offer a free gap analysis of the current CRM process, and we've got a bit of an audit tool in and around that too, and the documents. And so it's obviously not for everyone. So if your business has got it nailed, happy with the skill set, then probably not for you. But if your business is maybe at the start of the journey, continuing, I know you've got a fair way to go, then, and happy to take someone else to have a look at it and give some free advice, then that's probably that's who it actually suits. What's in it for us? Pretty much, I do this. I'm pretty passionate about critical risk and getting it right. Our motto is about saving lives at work, and if there's some way that we can give you some low-hanging fruit or access to some resources that can then help improve the process and plug some potential holes, then certainly that's what we're all about as well. And it's a pretty simple process. I think lovely you can put the email in there, but pretty much email us what you got. We do the gap analysis, and then there's a quick call to say, okay, look, this is what we found. Maybe this is where to start, or here's some other things maybe to consider as part of that. And look, I wish it was around when I was a safety manager, but I choose not to hold those roles any longer. So I think it's not too bad. We do all the work. There's no time and investment from your end. You can leverage off the plethora of knowledge base that we now have got, and I like the aspect of potentially some low-hanging fruit there. This is what you could do around this, because this is a bit of an issue that could make a fairly meaningful change. So yeah, if you're interested, drop us a note, then we can tic-tac back and forth, and I'll get one of my people to do the review, but it's not forever because we've got lots of things to take care of. So that's the end of the formal aspect. We've still got time left. That's good. Yeah, if you wanted to get involved in that review, then flick us an email. You can do that in the time. Right now, I've got time to do some questions or comments. Happy if you want to unpack something that was a certain issue or something you want to loop back to. The floor is yours. So there's anyone, and you don't have to put in the chat. You can there's only a few of us on the line. You can verbalize it if you want, and we can
Christian,
talk.
I've put forward at site that for mine that this is going to become more and more of a driver throughout the industry. Your thoughts of where it's headed?
Yeah, excellent question. Where do I start here? Okay, I might stop sharing. So I've been talking with RSHQ a lot. I've been lobbying them pretty hard that we need to do better and more in this space. So I'll run a 2-day deep dive once every, I don't know, let's say once every eight weeks. And I come in and I run some stuff for some people, and they say, hey, our SLT are way away from this. Don't even know nothing about nothing. yeah, we've got a real knowledge gap there, and we need to do something about it. And then the framework, we look at each site and their critical risk management framework either isn't there or it's kind of inside risk management. And yeah, it's not great. So I've been approached by RSHQ to help them with a journey. So they're rejigging how they're engaging industry in this space to take more of a risk-based approach to how they engage and come out and do their inspections and everything like that. And part of that will be looking at, their top 10 critical risks. They've done some bow ties. Using that as a lens to go and engage industry, they'll be talking about, and I've helped them soften potentially some of their language, asking about, okay, show us what your critical risks are, show us what the critical controls are, and show us how did you arrive at the state that these are your critical controls, okay? And for these critical controls, show me how you verify them and show me if there's some issues with the verification and what have you done in a result. So they're pretty much, well, I'm going to help them and help guide them in this way. Not going to direct the organizations in what you need to have, but once the organizations define what they have, then it'll be helping ask the questions around that pathway. So where that's heading in my mind, and looking at the commissioner's report, everyone needs to have a broad brush. If they don't, need to get one ASAP. Everyone needs to be able to show a bespoke risk assessment for these critical risks. Now, sometimes if you can, haven't thought this through too much, but let's say you've already got a SOP risk assessment. If it kind of you can map it back to the, let's say, underground fire as an example. If you can kind of map it back, then that might be okay. There's going to be some risks that you just can't do that. So you need to be able to show that level 2 analysis. Then you need to be able to show critical controls. That's terminology now that is being called out. So everyone's going to have critical controls, and therefore you're going to have verification. Coupled with this is, Mika, I'm not sure if you're based in Queensland, but just bear with me, is the recognised standard 22 and competencies.
Glad you brought that up, because my next point that I was going to add to it, but I found has been two things, is the requirement to have your gap analysis, and with literally all the applicable recognised standards. The other thing I've found has been as well, because that facilitates part of your verification process and some of your auditing and assurance and all of that. There seems to be a bit of a gap in the skill set to be able to undertake a gap analysis. Is that something you've found across different sites?
Yeah. Oh,
I've been doing gap analysis for areas that I've got no experience in, but you're able to apply the skill set for it. But I've been really taken back by that.
Yeah. Mika, I'll come to your question shortly. It's a good question. So yes, recognised standard 22 is now going to, and I was working on this for another organisation just this morning, is if I'm a risk owner, what can I, under recognised standard 22, actually be a risk owner for? If I'm a critical control owner under recognised standard 22, what can I actually be a critical control owner for? Still a little bit of that implied at a verification level. If I'm verifying critical control, what level of competence do I need in that critical control? And depending on the design of the system, you could, if you have great verification questions, you could put up a solid case. Well, you don't need to be an expert in fire protection if here's all of this really good verification suite, but let's just assume there as well. And then, so I had an interesting question. I know I'm sort of moving around a little bit. An example I was working through this morning is aviation. So aviation may be a critical risk for an organisation, but no one within that, unlikely that anyone within the organisation has a AQF level 6 or 5, anything to do with aviation. So how can we both manage the risk, because there's ways you can do it, but also meet the requirements of recognised standard 22. And my suggestion, first suggestion is we have a nominated subject matter expert who is the competent person in said, risk. Bit of a mouthful. Happy to keep talking about that one. Does that answer your first question? Give you my slant on it? Yeah. So yeah, that's a two with. I'm happy that RSHQ are happy to, I won't say partner, but listen to me, because some of the language they were using at the start, my concern was it could have, and potentially still could, drive this, oh, we need critical controls, let's just choose some. And then we have this absolute explosion of critical controls across the industry, and we're in no better shape than if we didn't have them in the first place. Miko, your question. In terms of hierarchy controls, what's your opinion that only engineering and higher controls can be critical controls? Excellent question. My opinion, and I'm going to have to share my screen. I'll just do this before we jump off the line. Hang on, just bear with me. I'll share it again. Share screen, and it's that one. Share. I go backwards. Yeah. Make that bigger. Okay. Make this bigger. All right. Hopefully you can see that. There is this comes back to control effectiveness assessment. So this matrix you see here, it's a two-stage process. I don't have the first stage, but I'm just showing the second page. Think kind of the same principle as a likelihood and consequence matrix, where there's two different data sets, and bringing them together gives us an ultimate view. So this says matrix one. Matrix one's all about how prevalent is the control in and of itself. So let's say we had, let's use a fire extinguishers example. Sorry, fire sprinklers. So matrix one is all about, well, are there fire sprinklers everywhere they need to be? And give ourselves a rating from, excellent all the way through to very poor. It's like, oh, look, we've got them all in the workshop and the warehouse, but the old prep plant building, we don't have them there. So the matrix one is all about, is the control where it should be? And as a control in of itself, is it working well or not? Matrix two here is about, well, what level of risk reduction does this control provide? So let's say if we had fire sprinklers in relation to fire, then potentially it could have a high risk reduction, because once it kicks in, then potentially it dampens the fire or reduces the severity. And so, hey, that's a pretty good control. Versus, I don't know, let's say another one of our controls was evacuation plan or something like that. Would it have as greater impact? And so bringing those two different dimensions together, we end up somewhere, each control or critical control, we can do it for all controls. Let's say each critical control ends up somewhere on the continuum. So looping back to your question around, would we say, well, engineering controls or elimination, then we can see one of the components here is around the level of risk reduction. So this automatically would tell us things that can eliminate or engineer out the risk are going to have a higher level of risk reduction, and therefore we're going to end up higher on this chart compared to some that don't. So, however, there's always a however, when we do our bow ties, there may be some pathways where there just are no elimination controls or no engineering controls. And we may end up, if the only thing we can come up with is some type of administration thing, I know we separate by time, distance, or it's some rule set. And if that's all we got, then that's all we got. And we may end up, hopefully we're not in that space, but we may end up this thing's marginally adequate, but in the absence of anything else, that's what we got to go with. Hopefully that answered your question, mate. I've got to bring up the chat function again. In our 2-day, we go a bit deeper on that, but hopefully that gives you the flavour of what I'm talking about. I need to find a chat again. Anyone else have a question? Let's just have a look here. Yeah. Hope that answered your question, Miko. Oh, we're at 12 o'clock. Okay. I'm happy to stay on the line too if anyone wants to keep chatting after this. So, yep. Also, flick us an email. You can get a copy of the slides, copy of the recording, and also, actually, Shane, you're talking about audit checklist. We have developed one. It's pretty generic, but it does go through the different stages. So those 8 or 9 stages, and it has some prompt questions for each of those stages. So if you want a copy of that, mate, just flick us an email, and lovely, we'll shoot it back to you. And that's good. Miko answered your question. Cool. All right, everyone knows where to find me. So thanks, everyone. I made it in time. I'm happy to stay on the line after the formal end. If anyone needs to go, then you guys can rock and roll. Appreciate your time. I'm confident it wasn't a waste of time. Probably might have given you a bit too much information, but as always, if you've got any clarifying questions, just come back to me. So have you got to go. Catch you later.
See you later, Jug.
Yeah, Sean, I have to take your dark glasses off now.
Thanks, mate. See ya.
Thanks, Miko. Goodbye.
Yeah, Jug.
Yeah, right.
Goodbye.